Hi, we're in our last part of the module. I'm setting a timer so I can be a reasonable speaker. I hope it's going, I hope it's going for you. I hope there is breath and peace. We're together again. It's our last module, so let's take a big breath in. I want to say that I haven't shared my poems with you yet, and if you would like to, in the last part of this one, you will hear my poems. So that's exciting. I didn't want to taint your experiences. I didn't know if anybody would even care. But today we're going to be talking about, we're going to go directly to your experience. Um, so this book is a bit new, Transmedicine, Steph Schuster, The Emergence and Practice of Treating Gender. And we're going to use this to inspire some poems. Specifically, there's two chapters. The whole book is online. I also put one more book online that you can also read from as an alternative if you're really a historian. Histories of the Transgender Child is just utterly brilliant and quite famous. Schuster's book is a little bit newer. I mean, by a couple of years. These books are all pretty new. And I'll talk mostly about Schuster because I'll be using that for class, but I wanted to give you that backup. But our idea today is to try a new poetic form. Maybe try two if you're digging this, but at least one, and write at least one poem. Um, and the idea is to look at like what's actually happened in medicine currently, historically, which this book deals with. Um, and the short of it is really looking at how trans medicine for adults has been treated over time. And my favorite two sections that we're going to work from today are, and I share these with out of love, is medical uncertainty, chapter 4, working with trans patients, what it must be like for you, my lord. And 5, uncertain expertise in trans medicine. And I think you probably are wrestling with that. My gosh, this person, this human being, this expert PhD in trans studies just sent me to watch YouTube videos for wisdom in section. I'm sure that's hard. So I want to talk to you about like how much we don't know to find out. We're of course going to go to Sleeping on the Wing because it's the best, and we're going to be turning to. I'm going to talk about a few different poetic forms today, but the one I might spend the most time on, I think. Um, so this book is incredibly white. So I did want to give you a medical doctor who writes poems. So clearly we're going to do some William Carlos Williams, tiny poems, and we'll talk about why soon. Um, but I also wanted to talk on something that I wanted to make sure you had a poet that you definitely recognized. So why not Emily Dickinson? I love her. Emily D is just, God bless her, nuttier than a fruitcake, and and in some ways so liberated by it and cursed by the society she's in and an utter genius. And I live not 30 minutes from her house, which I still haven't gone on a tour with. What am I doing with my life, right? Um, but uh, I want to just leave poets here for you to find the brilliant, utterly brilliant Canadian poet. And this is the Griffin Poetry Prize. If you don't know, this is the Canadian Poetry Prize. Please check out its winners or the people who are nominated, maybe the people who submit. This is one of my favorite all-time poets, Billy Ray Belcourt, who was given to me. This book was given to me one of my best trans friends. I have trans friends in every country, just agree with me. This Wound is a World, who is a queer Indigenous poet. We're also going to talk, oops, more in my kitchen, big reveal. Um, we're also going to touch on Ocean Vuong to think about immigrant experience, and Night Sky with Exit Wounds, super famous author, also really brilliant poet. And finally, The Place of Scraps, Jordan Abel. Won all sorts of Canadian poetry prizes, like the George Lampert and the Dorothy Livesey. But the point being that also very famous Canadian poetry prizes. but also point being that there are other poets to imitate and other ways of doing poetry. So I'm going to give you snippets of each of them. So again, we have our last set of poems today. And where are we going with this? What are we going to do? So the goal today and to think about in the arch is, as a medical practitioner, how do you want to engage trans patients? What do you want to do for your care center, your hospital, your practice, your care list? What do you want to learn? What do you want to know? What do you want to say? Do you want to walk in and by the way say, and my pronouns are he, him, right? Do you want like what's in there for you? There's so many ways of doing this. I'm also going to end today with some more resources because resources are the best. Actually, I can put them in here because we have time. I'll put the resources in here. So, and they're going to show up on the screen. So I'm going to move over. For those of you who would like to know more in the future, I will leave these things here and I will make a list. But the first one is the book Trans Care, probably floating. Hopefully I did it right there, by Hill Malatino, who is, or it's just like popping up over my face, so whatever, who is an utter brilliant trans philosopher. This book is super accessible. It's 62 pages long. It's also like a half-size book, so it's really 31 pages long, which is a great sense of success that you like sat down and read a book, but it was 31 pages. Every trans scholars call this the little yellow book. It's going into many multiple printings. I have been part of that. I have probably given away 50 copies. I find it very grounding and loving, and it has so many quick introspective ideas about how trans people care for one another. And if you're interested in care, which you do, this might be a great book for you. Another one that I mentioned earlier is Histories of the Transgender Child. I'm going to talk about that more in the next section. Another is Cameron Awkward Rich's The Terrible We. I mentioned that in the last module about who is the we of trans people. It's a very unclear group of people. And another one, especially thinking emotionally about working with trans people, Hill Malatino, same author as Trans Care, wrote a book called Side Affects, Being Trans and Feeling Bad, talking about burnout. If you're experiencing burnout, just that chapter is amazing. Envy, there's a lovely chapter on numbness called Fuck Feelings. So if that resonates at all, it's just great to read. I gave it to my lovely cis girlfriend who's experiencing burnout. She's like, this is actually great. Thank you. And then you're might thinking, how about like resources? Like, how do I do pronouns, Jack? Okay, so that's where Davy Schlasko comes in. Davy Schlasko is a really awesome human being, student affairs guru. And Davy's trans mask, who went to a local college called Smith. It's one of the oldest women's colleges, and historically women's colleges, along with Mount Holyoke, where Emily Dickinson went, where I went. Sorry, just shout out to Emily Dickinson again. Anyway, Smith, where Davy went, was really off to trans people for quite a bit of time. And Davy wrote a resource guide, how to handle people's pronouns, what to do, and printed it up and handed it out for student affairs as a student. And it kept being circulated and sent to other campuses until Davy wrote a book, and Davy kept writing books. And so the whole collection of Davy Schlasko books are, I think, the best resource guides out there. And they have been facilitated a million times over, and they're things you can do on your own. What kind of stuff is in there? Like, I gave you like things to read, here's things to use. So one of my favorite, and I would like to say that the Davy Schlasko books, I've always learned from. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so not good at this. I mess up pronouns. So in the pronoun book, for example, there's a great story about a trans woman whose boss doesn't say her pronouns, and she hates working there. And so instead of interviewing the same trans people who are upset about what's going on with their pronouns or their names or whatever at work, or how they're being treated, they interviewed the people who aren't treating them very well. And said, hey, to the boss, like, why is it you don't use her pronoun? He said, well, she doesn't do her work very well and she's late. She doesn't. They said, have you thought that perhaps if you set her pronoun properly, she might show up and do that? And the boss went, oh, and he did. And guess what? She showed up for work all the time. She was the best ever. And so I loved that. I loved interviewing the people who aren't doing it rather than the people who are experiencing it, who are at times often quite powerless to change things. The other thing I love about that book is Davey encourages you to put pronouns on all of your appliances and start using them. Like, is the dishwasher on? He's working, right? And the fridge is acting up. She needs some attention. I need to call the repairman for her. Repair person, Jack. Anyway, point being that then Davey says, it's really hard to do that. And then Davey says, change the pronoun tag, like take the post-its and move them. And you have to change pronouns for your appliances. It was a wildly difficult experience and really helpful practice. So that said, resources and last poem and great things ahead. So let's talk about trans medicine and histories of the transgender child.